Alright, this is part 2 of usage rights 1. So this is like the first in a series of things where I'm going to talk about this concept which I am calling usage rights. This will become more apparent in the later videos. Clickbaity title for this is Fixing Climate Change. Of course, this is not a fix for climate change. It is a component in a way of making things perhaps less worse than they could be in the future. Though to be honest, this is kind of a bit late, but we can still do something and we can still make a better world. So in the previous video, I talked about the general, I probably had a summary. I don't have a summary thing because the reason this is 2 parts is that they ran out of space on my, I can only film 30 minutes at a time on my camera, so I had to break this into 2, but the point is in the last video we talked about the basic idea of this, which is kind of like a carbon credits thing but for individuals. So the individuals are the ones who are allocated the carbon credits, and they are sold in general by a centralized market to the users, the consumers of this. So I'm actually going to have to rephrase this here. So the consumers actually of carbon credits, this should not be the consumers, this should be the results to the producers. But the consumers are the people who pollute or emit the carbon dioxide. But go back, watch part 1, and then you'll be up to play. So now that I've actually just said that, I realize that saying result to consumers is not the best way of putting it, because the consumers are the producers of stuff, not the individuals. But we'll just say results to the individuals of a society, which should cross this out. Individuals. Or if we could be really economicsy, we could say result to households. So the consumers, individuals, will pay more for items. So because basically there are now a cost where all people who are emitting carbon dioxide have to buy these carbon credits for the right to emit, to pollute. Goods will go up, and this should be an expected thing. So you will have to pay more for some items, but you receive back, you receive money from the sale of your pollution rights. So you start off with free pollution rights that are given to you, and those are sold on to the emitters. So the theory is, if you get 1 ton of carbon dioxide pollution rights per year, and that's sold off to companies, and you buy goods that use 1 ton of carbon per year, it's going to balance out, right? You're going to get like $100, but your goods over the air are going to go up by $100. I'm making these numbers up if it's not apparent. That would be the idea. So if you are a sensible user of carbon dioxide, this scheme does not cost you anything in the end, even though it appears it does by increasing the costs of certain things. But of course, if you use less, if you are allocated 1 ton of carbon dioxide pollution every year, and you only use half a ton because you're real good, you do all the right kind of things, well, you're going to receive $100 for the sale of your items, of your carbon credits, but you're only going to face increased costs of $50. So over the year, you'll make $50 profit. But if you're the kind of person who is using more, then say you use 1.5 tons, well, you're going to have to, basically your costs are going up by $150 per year, but you're only receiving $100 in credit. Now, of course, some of these things are not going to quite work out because some goods, the way that the market works, like I haven't really, it's like, this is hard, you kind of have to model everything, so this is like an open question. But I feel when I say this is that obviously in certain cases, depending on what you're buying, it might actually turn out that it doesn't quite work out this way, but I'm not too sure if that's the case. I think in general it should be close or very similar, very it shouldn't be vastly different from the fact that if you are using your allocation throughout the year, you are not losing or gaining money. And this is important Because another sort of alternative, this is sort of not inspired, but when I was first thinking about this, I found out that there were already these ideas. I think they're called transferable energy quotients or transferable energy credits or something like this. So a very similar idea to this. It's changed a few names. I haven't actually looked into it for years. I'm terrible at researching things. But the point is the idea behind that was that you were actually given individuals an alternative currency or a side-by-side parallel currency of pollution credits. So say you had to go buy something that required pollution credits, you'd have to also pay with these extra credits. So maybe you were going to buy petrol for a car. We'll just say for the sake of argument it would work with petrol. Fuel for your car, and then you'd have to pay, along with the cash for the thing, you'd have to actually pay the carbon credits. This scheme here, the idea of this is that you don't need the extra currency. You can bypass that whole thing and just do it through the single market, and it will still work out to the same result. Sorry, pardon me. But in an easier and more accessible way, like a way that's actually more practical. It's not practical to have another extra currency layer that you have to give out to everybody. Maybe everybody gets a special card every year, and then they get a balance put on the card, and then everybody. It's just way too much work. This is a much better way of doing it, and it's not a tax. So the money is not going to the government, and I really want to push that because I think like Canada had a problem where they tried to, quite often when you introduce a carbon tax as a solution to these problems, you get people up in arms all over the show saying, it's the government imposing stuff upon us. This is really separate from the government. All of this is doing is trying to correct the market. It's trying to make a market that actually that works better. So, and as such, what are the results in the market? So the goods and services that do not use as much CO2 or don't use any CO2 will have an advantage because they don't need to buy these credits. So their prices won't go up. Of course, this relies on the fact that your market is well functioning and that you don't have these oligopolies, controlling both the low carbon sectors and the high carbon sectors. I think you'd get these sort of market effects where you might see the whole prices go up and people will be exploiting that. So as long as you have a well-functioning market with many sellers, many competitors within the market, you would expect to see that the goods that do not require as much CO2 to not be increasing in price, not being taking advantage of this perception that prices should go up. And which is good, right? Because there's a direct encouragement for you to use things that are lower in carbon emissions, without you actually having to know anything about the processes that go on behind the doors, because most people do not have access to the information about what products are using the most carbon. So this is all we're throwing that out the window, and we're just letting you and your natural desire to buy the cheaper goods lead you in the right direction. So you're basically encouraged to minimize your risk without actually needing to consciously do so. So that's my whole point for that argument. So we could have alternatives. Now, I'm actually trying to realize, haven't I already done this? But the thing is, I actually have almost done this. I did the second part previously, but then my camera ran out of battery space. So I ran out of battery. So if I'm a little bit off, it's because I feel like I'm in a parallel universe. But anyway, we have alternatives to the market. So this is another important, and I think will become more of a discussion point as I go on to usage rights number 2 and 3, where you have this default CO2 market, but you don't have to restrict it to that. You don't have to have it such that individuals have to use this. It's not a requirement. It's just the default option that makes it easier for almost everybody involved. But individuals could choose not to sell their allocation at all. They could just abstain from selling it or part of their allocation. And this is, I think, really a powerful function of this, because this means that when you're like normally deciding to make environmentally conscious decisions, quite often it may not really make any actual impact. For example, if I choose not to drive a car, well, the petrol's still going to get, the fuel is still going to be basically consumed. There might be a very small adjustment, but it won't be as much as, me taking away my actual fuel usage. Just because of the way the market works, just because there's always people who want to use it, and there's always, especially when it comes to things like fuel, there's a little bit, we have OPEC, which is a cartel, it's an oligopoly. They'll sell that petrol whatever they can. Maybe their profits aren't as best that they can be, but they'll still sell it, that fuel, that oil. Whereas this case, what you're actually doing is you're saying, no, this carbon cannot be emitted. Right? It doesn't matter what the rest of the market does. I've abstained from selling my rights to emit. So that carbon cannot be emitted. So it gives you this way of actually making a strict impact, which may, from an individual point of view, not be that useful. But of course, it allows the idea that you could start social movements where multiple people agree to not actually sell all of their credits. I'm going to come back to this in later videos. So also individuals could sell or gift them directly to other people in whatever way they want. They don't have to use the market. And they could also specify that their credit should only be sold to certain users. So I think the idea behind this is it actually gives you a sort of an extended democracy. Say you don't like certain industries. So one of them, and I think of this, I am actually vegan, but I'm not going to go pushing veganism here. But I think it is an interesting sort of case. You may choose not to sell your carbon credits to meat producing or animal producing industries. And there are other sort of industries where you, and of course you might be like, chronic, I don't want to use rabid, but meat eating fan, and you're going to be like, I'm only going to sell them to these kind of industries because I want to get back at those. But you can do that, and this sort of gives you this way of slightly nudging society in a certain way by making some things more expensive because you're not selling your carbon credits. Again, the impact of you choosing only to restrict who you are selling to is going to be small. And that actually goes back to my previous point where I said that the price of things may not be, so certain industries may end up paying different prices for their carbon. And again, there's a lot of things going into how the market might actually work, and I think you need a lot of modeling, for me anyhow, to truly get what the actual subtle effects might be. But in this case here, you could, just by enough people doing this, nudge the market a little bit in that it becomes a bit more expensive to do certain things and a bit cheaper to do other things. It's a sort of democratic, because it's democratic, it's by the people. The people are able to nudge society as a whole in this sort of organic, non-centralized way. So that sort of thing, I think, could appeal to a lot of people across different political spectrums as an idea. But again, it's just an interesting thing about it. One of the issues, sorry, we're going to be coughing the whole way through this. It's because I ate a cookie. So I'm going to have a drink. Which kind of ruins, because I felt like the first video in this series went really well. This one's not going so well, but as I said, I'm going to redo these at some point. So one of the problems, I think, is, and in fact it's a major issue, is this local versus imported. If you're incurring a cost on local producers, but not on external foreign producers, the consumers will buy more imports. So the obvious thing here is, if local producers have to buy carbon credits, but external producers do not, other countries are not having to pay for this, then there's now an incentive to buy from, to import your goods rather than buy locally. And on the other side of this, of course, is that it will be harder for producers to export their goods because they're having to pay or buy credits from their fellow citizens. So the obvious solution is that this scheme needs to be kind of global, or it needs to be across trade partners. Now, completely honest, this is unlikely. I mean, in this sort of circumstance, what you'd like to do is a few small countries to put forward this, and for there to be enough social traction, momentum, for this to be adopted more widely across the world. So you could, one obvious alternative is that, well, the simplest thing here is that the importers need to buy credits too. So in the case of the importing, they are virtual emitters. They are, of course, emitters overseas, but you're saying you're importing a product, and then there has to be some sort of regulatory body which is saying, well, if you're importing this, you're essentially creating this much carbon dioxide. You have to buy those credits in order to import into your country. So in the case of exporting, maybe I've got this on the next page, that again is an issue that we have to talk about. Maybe you can say, well, if you're exporting goods, you can get, a refund, or you can claim back, or you don't have to use credits. I really would rather we didn't. You just have to make a statement like you're making you have to step up your game in order to make for a better world. And this whole scheme, and along with the rest of my schemes, are trying to also address other social issues, which are like the increasing inequality within societies. This idea is not meant to disrupt, is meant to actually lower inequality. Again, I'll be going through this later on. So the idea would be, yes, you might make a small cost to society by imposing this cost upon exporters that makes them less competitive on a global market. But the cost is not going to be spread, is not going to harm the lower parts. It's only going to mainly harm the higher top percent of the population, is my hope. I'm going to come back to this because this needs a lot of talking about, so we'll do that in a future video. Other downsides, of course, and you have to have accurate assessment of the CO2 emissions and active policing to this emission, but this is common to any market or taxation approach. You need to be able to say how much these people are producing, and in fact the previous arguments, of course, apply to any current solution, any emission trading scheme that you have. So, we have to all solve those problems anyhow. I think this is just going to end up being a better solution for the people of the society, and a more socially acceptable solution. So it requires so you might say it requires expensive setup and it's complex, but fixing things, costs money. You have to do this. Lots of things are complex. Fractional reserve banking and the central bank are complex, but people are fine with that. Most people don't completely understand how that works. This is, to me, much easier to understand and is much more in your hands. It's like most people don't understand how the central bank work, or they don't really care because they don't interact with the central bank. In this system, it's something that people connect with. So yes, it does require money, but that's just the thing you have to pay. You have to do this to make the world a better place. Central markets also cost money to run. So as I said, what did I call it before? The market, the central market that manages the exchange, does cost money to run. You could actually just have a tax that everybody pays throughout. Money could just come from government taxes like usual, but you could fund it on levies on the credit sale. So whenever you do a sale, a little bit you have, the producer, the emitter has to pay the market for the service of doing that. Just like when you sell shares, you have to pay your broker, or you have to pay whatever exchange that you're using, however you're paying for it. There's always a cost, and that could pay for it. So that's not, to me, a huge issue. The big thing is it too complex? And I mean by this, not just is it too complex for people to understand, because I don't think it is, but I find people are struggling sometimes when I've talked about it. But then once you talk about it a bit, they get the idea. Well, it could at least, the point is, even if it is too complex, maybe it's too expensive, it could be an ideal. Like, it could be a model that we use for what we should be aiming for, what we want to see. So we have another alternative solution we kind of want to see the results being similar to what you might see if this scheme was in place, the ideal solution that's too complicated or too hard to implement. But we have a simpler solution. We can then use this idea at least to judge how good our alternatives might be. So we could also use it to justify a tax. So one thing I think, like, this is what I was a bit confused about Canada, is a tax where instead of the tax going to the government, it just gets evenly redistributed out to individuals. So this has the same sort of similar outcomes. It doesn't have quite the flexibility where I don't get to choose who I sell my things to, or I want to abstain, and it doesn't quite make me feel, it won't make the average individual feel so connected, I think, as this scheme. But it could have the same sort of outcomes and be simpler. And if you were to justify this tax by first going through this sort of idea and then saying it's just too complicated to implement, we're going to do it with a simplified tax where every carbon requires this amount of money to pay, you have to pay, and then that just gets redistributed out to the citizens. You get some similar results, but you can sort of go back to the people who are like, oh no, another tax, the government's trying to take over us. You can say, well, actually, it's just our way of trying to do this. Maybe. It's sometimes hard to come across to things. I think, this is the last page. So why is the idea good? So this is my last bit here. It can appeal to the fans of the invisible hand of the market, right, as well as to social egalitarian. So the whole idea of this is, I think, as someone who's quite lefty, but also someone who studied economics and likes, emergent properties and the ethos of, not the ethos maybe, but the spirit of the invisible hand solving things, not having a central government to do things. To me, this idea appeals to that, but it also appeals to the social egalitarian in me, because it says, we all each, it's the individuals of a society that basically everything should be focused around. And in this case, it is. Every individual gets an equal amount of rights to emit. And we just let the market sort that out in the most optimal way. But at the heart of this, we're talking about individuals each being treated equally. So another thing, so further on from that is that individuals are not, the whole hope of this is that they're not unfairly burdened. So a lot of schemes, it feels like people are going to jump up and down and say, well, that's going to hurt the poor more than the rich. The rich can go off and they have the money to pay for these things. I'll talk about this later on when I have a video about toll roads and things like this. But in this case here, if you're living in like a normal, within your means, then within your carbon emitting means, this should not unfairly burden you. And I think, quite often it may in fact be the more wealthy people in society who are using more than their fair share of carbon. So in this case here, the extra burden will fall on the people who aren't using their fair share, which may in fact be the more wealthy people. In a justified way, in a way that you can lay out why this person ought to actually be paying more for their things, and why essentially you're compensating other people. You're compensating other people because you're using their rights to emit. You're taking their rights to emit. And so you ought to compensate them because that's their rights. They're not using it. They are selling it to you. So you don't have to buy that stuff. You could just, use less carbon. So I think there's a lot of ways to go to sort of like create a good argument for why this is just and reasonable, that you could sell to many people who are going to put forward market-based, free market ideology. And the last thing, if I want a bit of time left, is it connects the individual with the task at hand. So this is, I think, perhaps the most important thing, is that we have all these other schemes that are abstract for the average person, right? I don't understand how New Zealand, where I am, their emissions trading scheme exactly works. It never has any effect on me. I don't deal with this in any sort of way. We have all these solutions to climate change. Most of these are like, you know, recycle, blah, blah, blah. These small individual things that don't really make any big difference. But here we are actually saying, you're the ones who have the rights to emit, and that that the individual is focused here. It's connected to them. They have a degree of power. They are always reminded what's going on, because every year they're getting their money from this fund. You know, they're getting money from the sale of their carbon emitting rights. It's the individual at the heart of all of this, right? And so they have the power how to use them, and they are part of the solution. In fact, they are the focus of the solution. And I think if you want to sell something to people, this is the most important. It says, no, it's not just some abstract thing that the government's forcing upon all of us. It's about you, and it's giving you power to make changes and to do and to live. You know, it's about you as a person. So that's basically my final point. Is it makes the climate crisis solution personal, with the ability to make a meaningful personal change. So I'm going to come back to this, because the next talk will be about extending this idea not to emitting pollution, but to the actual core usage of resources. So it's quite a bit of a jump, which might be harder to sell to people, but it opens up a whole box of interesting points about what would be a more equitable and just society in a way that's really quite interesting. So the effects will be quite interesting. But I'm going to leave it here for now. This would be, I think, the most likely thing to sell to governments. And if you did sell it to governments, it would be a good step for what I would think would be a good starting point for the next step. Get people on board with the idea. But I'm going to save that for the next video. The third one's going to be a bit of a doozy, so we're going to extend the idea even further in perhaps the craziest way. But that's the idea. Thanks for watching, and share, please share, make some comments. Like, this is the kind of thing. I have another channel where I don't tell people to really share because I don't really care, but in this channel I want the ideas to get out there. So if you read this and you thought it was an interesting idea, maybe you don't agree, but you think it's something that people should talk about. If you know of people who have been saying the same kind of things, please tell me. I'm not trying to steal other people's ideas. This is just my personal thoughts, and I'm sure other people have had the same kind of ideas. Please direct me to those people. I will go through and have a look at them and see if I can make any interesting comments about it. But let people know all the different sorts of ideas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.